All right, so happy Wonder Wednesday, everyone. I hope you're all doing well wherever in the world you're joining us from. And as per usual, if you are watching us live right now, please send a message in the chat. Give us a hello. I would love to hear and see who's watching us right now. Because one of the things that we like to say here the most is that we would like for our events to be as interactive as possible. So this is your opportunity not only to learn with our Floxies community, but also to be networking with fellow designers and web developers here during our live streams. And if this is your first time here at Floxies, we're an international community for women in UX UI design and Webflow development. And we gather together every Wednesday, inviting influential speakers from either the design or the Webflow space to make sure we provide our community with the highest quality of education available out there. And so, with that in mind, we've been hosting a series of events in terms of design. So, we've been hosting 4 events to do with Figma and how to structure your portfolio. But actually, how do you even start thinking about designing as a mental framework, which was really really cool. And we hosted those events with our Floxies educator Lizzie Curtis. And so we're following up with a mini series, which is an intro to Webflow, because we really like combining those two tools, because we found that the combo of Figma and Webflow together is a really powerful one. And especially in our community, we've been facilitating collaborations within our community members. And so we've been connecting designers with Webflow developers, and it's been absolutely incredible to watch and see them grow and work together. And so, because of that, we're focusing our next couple of events on Webflow. And to do so, we've invited one of the most amazing Webflow developers out there, Alessia. And so, without further ado, let me get into our Gather Town, which is where we host our virtual office here. And let me get to the stage. Alrighty. Here we go. Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, Maria. Great to see you here.
Hello.
Long time no see.
I know. Wednesdays are hard.
Wednesdays are hard, I know, but you know what makes them a little bit less hard is for us to come here and be all together. And Penny is here as well. Oh, I love it. All my friends are here. Hello, Rachel, Kelly, Lucy, and yeah, all the people that I didn't say hi to earlier. Hi, great to see you all here. I was just saying how grateful and how grateful I am to have you here, Alessia, as well as all the other amazing speakers that we've been having at Floxies. And now it's almost been 3 years, of me being here almost every Wednesday hosting live streams. But the most important thing is to have such talented people, not only in the community, but that are offering their time, like you, Alessia, to be here and help us grow and help us teach more people in the design and Webflow space. And so it's absolutely fantastic. I can't believe that we've come so far. And yeah, I love it. Anything might happen on Wednesday, but this is definitely my favorite hour of the day, at least. And
I
so,
mean, thank you, Claudia, because 3 years, oh my God, like the consistency every single Wednesday, it's just incredible. So I feel like we should all applaud you more than anyone else to keep it going. And yeah, thank you so much.
absolutely. And it's just great, and it's a great opportunity for us all to not only learn from our expert speakers, but also to start networking with our community members, establish some friendships or professional opportunities. And I've seen both of those things happening in our community, so it's really really great. And I was just saying, Alessia, that we've been talking about design for about 4 episodes with Lizzie before, and sort of the mental framework with Figma and design in general. And then we started our intro to Webflow series with you last week, which was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for such an insightful event. I loved all the tips and tricks that you shared with us last week. I definitely didn't know a few of them. And so if you haven't watched the first episode, we covered the best practice on how to structure your Webflow build. And so today we were going to look into classes and frameworks, right?
Yes. So last week we did kind of the project setup. So looking at the project settings, setting up all the variables, the text styling, and that sort of thing. And today, hopefully another insightful one with a few tips, classes and frameworks. So looking at class naming, page structure, custom CSS, and that sort of thing. So yeah, ready to jump in.
Ready to start. And before we do start, if you haven't met Alessia before, she's the co-founder at Code and Wonder, an amazing Webflow agency here in the UK, super successful one. They almost do it all, design, development, a little bit of no code, automation, and she's such an inspiring professional to be learning from. And so I do encourage everyone here to go ahead and connect with her. I'll be sharing her links in the chat.
Thank you. Great. Let's jump in. So classes and frameworks and CSS. So there's a few frameworks out there, which I thought I'd mention, because all of this series is kind of based on my experience and based on how I build in Webflow, but there's so many ways that you can build in Webflow, and I don't think there's necessarily one which is superior or better than others. It's just different ways. And the same goes with these different frameworks. And now what they all mean is basically, when you're in Webflow and you click on any element on here and then you create a class. So what do you type in here and how do you kind of create those classes and create those namings? And all these different frameworks, they're kind of a name convention system to keep it consistent across all the different projects. So I've got a few listed here of the ones I know. I'm sure there's a lot more that I missed, but I got Mast, Client First, Loomis, Knockout, Small, Medium, and Large, just to name a few. And I think Claudia sent you a few links of all of these. So I'm really bad at multitasking. So if you want to put those in the chat, I've got all the links for those. And they all cover kind of different things. Some are a bit more lightweight, like Mask. Client First is a bit more heavy and they cover more things. Loomis, I find it's more development heavy. So there's more custom code. So it might be a little bit trickier if you're not used to all of that custom code to get going with it. But yeah, they all cover different things. So I really encourage you to have a look at all of them and kind of find the ones that works for you and you just click with. You might also change depending on the project. Maybe some projects are more lean towards more one. For example, Mast is all based on the grid layout. So if you have a design that follows that, it's a great match. But in this lesson here, I'm not actually gonna go into any of these. And we're gonna just explore mainly how I name things and how understanding why naming is so important and why you see it all over Twitter, people saying like, what kind of frameworks and what names do you give and why is that so important?
I love that. And sorry to stop you there, but I love the fact that you're just that you introduced the importance of naming your classes, as a topic first before picking what the best framework for you might be. Because that's, one of the conversations that we often have, and then it's true, like people keep asking, what's the magic sauce or, what's the one tool that will be a solution for everything that will fit all. But actually the truth is there isn't one that fits all solutions, and so you have to find the one that works for you. But what the most important thing is actually focusing on why it's important to have these naming conventions and classes and be using them. So I love that.
Yeah, I feel like every time I try to explain something, it's either personal preference or try to get to the why of something. So all of these, they're all great. And it's basically personal preference in which one you pick. And that's why I feel like, why should you pick one? And why should you maybe come up with your own? Because that's also an option. And basically, every time that you create a class, and you have styling attached to it, it adds to the CSS file of the site. So the more classes you have, the bigger this file is, and the more when you load a site up, the longer it takes, basically. So that's one reason to keep it consistent, because then it reduces the amount of CSS that you have on a site, and keeps it kind of lightweight in your site system. Another one is, especially if the design is following kind of a design system, it's a lot easier, because then your class naming can also follow that design system, which means you can have a lot of components that you can reuse. And then for the client as well, it might be easier to reuse classes if you have maybe a more savvy client that enjoys kind of building on their own.
More technical, yeah.
Exactly. And then kind of comes to number 4, like creating reusable components for kind of match the style of the site. And why a lot of these frameworks are actually created by agencies. So we got Edgar Allen and Finsweet in there. I think a version of Mass is also used at Webflow. So a lot of these are created because you work within a team. So for example, at Code and Wonder, we have our own, which I'm going to share in a minute. And it's basically because, we have lots of people working on a specific site, and maybe someone goes on holiday and someone else needs to pick it up. So if we keep the naming consistent, it's a lot easier to, for the team to pick the site up and make the changes and have this like constant support for the client without being like, oh, the main developer is on holiday and I have no idea what all of this is about. So avoiding all of that, basically. So I thought, because this is more of a practical thing, we're gonna start with slightly off classes, but the page structure that I usually use for every single page that we build. So this is actually starting from the HTML perspective rather than the CSS. So we can go straight into Webflow and jump in. So this is the same project that we left off from the last session. So I'm just going to go ahead and actually, create a new page. So we just do a test one. We start completely from scratch, and kind of how I structure everything. So as you can see, it's completely empty and I just have the body. And we're just focusing on the HTML for now, so the elements. And what I always start with, usually these are components, but let's add a navigation. So where did they go? Here, navbar. Leaving it for this, like this for now. We're probably going to look at the navigation in the next session. And this is usually a component because, it's used on every single page. What we're going to do next is actually add, if I select my body, add a div. And I want this to be my main container that contains all the information of the page. So one thing to know is HTML tags. So by default, all of these are divs, which is the standard block that you get in HTML. But one tip is if you go to settings, you can actually change the tag here to lots of different things. And basically what this helps mainly with accessibility. So on-page readers can define, okay, this is the navigation. This is the main section of the site. And then at the end, you have the footer. So what I always do, I select main for this first container. And in here is where I'm going to put all of the content of the site. And then not lastly, actually. So we got the navigation, the main, and then I'm going to add let's add a section, just because I like the personal preference. I like the little icon of the section here. And I'm going to change it to the footer. So if I reopen the navigation, actually I should zoom in. I don't know if it's big enough.
That's great. Yeah.
When you see it. So this is how all of my pages are structured. I've got the body, I've got the navigation, which if you click on it, I don't think this, like the default, if you inspect the page, the default component or the default element of the nav bar has actually the HTML tag nav. So Webflow automatically adds that in. I then changed this div to have the main and the last one here to have the footer, which, you know, as you build the site, these two will probably become components anyway. And inside of the main, I usually split the page up by sections, and you can either use the div block, or I prefer using the section for two reasons.
Interesting.
Yeah, for two reasons. One is personal and the other one is practical. So now, this wasn't always the case, but now they automatically add the tag of section. So you don't have to change it yourself. If you added a div, you would have to change it to section in here. And the second reason, I just like the icon. Sorry.
Well, I guess it's more visual because it has those two lines that kind of give you the idea of a section, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's my personal reason for selecting this. I don't actually use any of the other structure pre-made components of Webflow. Section is the only one I use for those two reasons. Exactly.
Interesting. It'd be nice to run a poll and see how many people use section versus div. I'm gonna do that on X.
Do it. Or how many people use the rest of the pre-made components? I'm curious. Yeah, so, and inside the section, I usually have another, and this time I use the div instead of the container. Totally personal preference. I find the pre-made ones sometimes have some limits that it's fiddly to get around. So I prefer to use the basic one, but it's totally personal preference in here. And I usually give this the name wrapper. And what this class usually has is a margin of auto on the side, so it stays centered to the middle. Some padding left and right, and this depends totally on the design. A width of 100%, so it takes the whole span of the section. With a max width, again, depending on the design, because some design go full way. So you might have a max width or might not have it. So, I mean, position relative, you don't always need it in this case because I was following the Dare to Share designs. There were a few sections that, or a few blocks that needed the wrapper to be relative. So I added it here, but normally it would just have these initial parameters at the top. So very minimum in terms of styling, but what it allows you to do is to keep everything within kind of that wrapper in every single section. So this is it in terms of the main structure of what I have on literally every single page. So yeah, making sure that you have all of your HTML tags, which often get overlooked, and making sure that it's all kind of tagged in the right order as well. So going back to this is kind of what this was. So yeah, I've got my navigation, I've got my main, and then I've got, your maybe initial hero section with your wrapper and the content inside. You might have a second section with a wrapper and the content inside. And these can be as many as you want, as however long the page is. And then at the end, you usually have a footer. I mean, it's not necessary, but these days most sites do. So this is kind of the page structure that I use.
That looks really clean.
Yeah, and that's kind of also the difference between different frameworks, right? Different frameworks structure the page in different ways. I like the cleaner version, and then add if necessary.
This actually will make a really great tattoo for a developer.
I can send you the SVG. You can add it to your list. So that's the page structure. Now, this lesson is actually about naming, so we can move on to that. And this is just the way I name things. Again, different frameworks use different ways of doing it, but I usually use either the component name, and we'll get on what is a component in a second, with the underscore item dash whatever property it might have. Or another option is, especially for layouts, it might be like flex or grid, say the layout underscore the direction and the property in there. So what do I mean by components? These are sometimes reusable, actually most of the times reusable blocks that sits on the site. And by components, I don't necessarily mean components as in the green block icon that you get on Webflow, but a more general term of components. So imagine this is a web page, very stylized, actually two of them. And both of them might have the navigation components, both of them might have the hero component. You might have lots of different cards. So here it might be like a list of features, and down here might be a list of, I don't know, people in your company. They're both using like the same card design, for example. And then in these, they might have categories, or these might be like blogs or whatever they are. And this category appears in multiple sections. So this could be like just the category pill, could be a component on itself. A CTA, a footer. So these are all examples of what a component might be, or what I might mean by when I say components.
Or I guess like elements, elements of a page, if you don't want to get confused with the actual like function of a component in Webflow. This could be like, yeah, an alternative could be elements of a page.
Totally, yes. And a few example of what these might be is like if you have a hero, so this might be your hero component, and it might be different from the wrapper, for example, because you want the hero to be 100% view height, so like really big, for example. So it has different, very tailored CSS properties just for that component there. And inside this component, you might have a title and a hero paragraph. So let's say the title doesn't necessarily follow your H1. You could either name it like heading large if it's reused in multiple areas of the site, or if it's only used in this hero component, I would name it like hero underscore heading. So I know that it's only used in the hero component. And if I ever want to change the properties of that class, I'm not too worried that it's going to change somewhere else, which is not inside of a hero. While the heading large, I know it's more a general class name, so it might be reused in lots of different parts of the site. And the same for the paragraph. So you could be a hero underscore paragraph, or text underscore medium, for example, just to define the size of the text. And this is like the more simplistic one. A more complex one might be like a card example or the navigation. So in the card, I have the initial, I'm going to call it wrapper, but the initial div that it's called card on its own. And this is what I mainly call the component. So they don't necessarily have an underscore. It's just their own. And then whatever it's inside, it uses the component name with underscore whatever it is. So it might be image, it might be card content or card title, card info, all the different ones. And inside of this card, we have a category. So this, again, it might be reused in lots of different ways. So I just called it category because I'm thinking it's a component of its own. But if you did have a category style, which is only used within the card, it could be card underscore category. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone, but hopefully.
I think so. And it's nice, I'm sure you're going to share these slides with us. So it's just good to have, this visual representation as well. And again, that will make really nice, cute little cards. There's a product idea for you. You could have visual cards.
Yeah. And so everything, it's like by seeing the class name, you understand where that class is used immediately. Because if it has a component at the front, you know that it's only used within that component. If it has a more general name like heading large, it's used elsewhere on the site and everywhere else. So for layout, so these are kind of usually within some sort of layout, especially the card. It might be in a grid of 3 columns, for example, or maybe two cards next to each other, or whatever the design is. So for layouts, which are often reused across all of the site, I use a more general class name. And I mean, so it starts with the layout. So I usually start it either with grid or flex, depending which one it is. And then for flex, I'll have the direction. So whether it's horizontal or vertical. And if it does have a specific property, so for example, the gap between them, I could use large, small, medium, or this could change. I mean, I'm not that strict in terms of like what to name exactly, as long as it makes sense. Because I find that a lot of the sites that we work on, they're very bespoke. So we don't necessarily have one naming convention fits all. So each one of the sites has kind of their own very individual class naming, or like classes, but they all kind of follow this system. So even if you're not familiar exactly with that project, they all kind of make sense. And if you have very specific layouts, so for example, I've got grid underscore filters here, because it might be one of those grid with a very tight column on the left where you put all your filters, and a wider column on the right. So that's like a very specific layout, which has a very specific class. And what have I got? Yeah. So next up, combo classes. Because
I love a good combo class. That's like matching. That's like matching your French fries with your ice cream, which is something that I do.
So yeah, because we all know all of this is great in theory, right? It's like, oh, look how clean it is. It's all great. But we all know that once you start building, it starts very clean until it's not. And you have little quirks, and all of a sudden, this card has a slightly bigger padding around it, because the design is that like teeny tiny different from the rest of them. So how to manage that and
Yeah.
that brings me to combo classes.
We have a question in the chat from Yazaman. They say, what if we have two different cards in our design? How should we name it? And so I guess, this is also a good way to introduce combo classes.
Yes, and that's a perfect example. So the way combo classes work in Webflow is actually slightly different from how it necessarily works in CSS. So in Webflow, you have two ways of adding combo classes, which is one is two primary classes. So these are two classes that you've separately created and then added together, and they would pull from, their main class properties. And the second option is the more traditional combo class, where you have your primary class and then a secondary class that only exists in combination with that primary class. And that makes it quite complicated. And that is why I usually ask everyone to limit their combo classes to a maximum of 3, because I find after 3, it becomes a bit too much to maintain.
Yeah.
So when you're presented with a design and you ask yourself, oh, should I create a combo class, or should I duplicate the class and create a new one? So this is the question that I ask myself when I reach that point. It's like, if there was a change to the main class, so for example, with your card example, let me get the card. You have one card which has, actually all cards have a shadow. And you have one card with no padding, and you have one card with padding. I know it's a weird example, but run with me. The question I would ask, if I were to change, for example, and make a change to the card, so remove the shadow and add an outline instead, or a border, would you want that to affect your second design of the card as well? So if something changes to kind of the base styling of that card, would you want it to affect all of them? And if the answer is yes, then use a combo class. And if the answer is no, duplicate the class or use a variation of the class. So for the card example, if you have a card with a shadow and you want to add more padding to it, I would add a combo class, so that if in the future I want all the cards to change that shadow, it will affect all of them. But if you want, you have two card designs and you don't want them to be linked, so if you want to change the shadow in one but not the other, then I would use a variation of it. I know it might be a bit.
And we're going to be looking into. No, that makes total sense. I wonder if we're going to be looking into what a variation might look like.
Yes, I think that actually brings me to. I've put all of this in kind of a bit of a doc. This has been made like a few years ago. I think I was reading through it this morning, and it's all still stands and still sort of up to date. I need to add variables to this, but it's basically everything that we've covered in this lesson in more detail. So if you want to dig deeper, you can go to this site, which is, Flow class is a placeholder. I haven't named this, so if you want to help me come up with a name, that would be great. But Claudia, I think I sent you the link, so if you want to share that as well.
Absolutely.
So in this, where it's everything which is we covered. So the introduction of why classes are important, and the structure of the site, the naming convention, and it goes even deeper into what spacing is and how to deal with that. So I split it out into, the page structure that we looked at, but I go deeper and explain every single HTML tag in there, or I mean the ones that are mostly used. How to
I just quickly glanced at the footer and I loved your description. Well, the footer is the footer.
Yes. I mean, I'm not a copywriter, but hey.
I love it. Straight to the point.
I don't know how else to explain it. Going through the structure and all the different HTML tags, the main, the section, and so forth. And usually also I add what are the most used CSS properties for each one of them. I then go into layouts, which we briefly covered, so the grid, flex, and I give you a few examples of like class naming. There's one thing that I want to change, which I haven't yet. I didn't have time, but I used to always put the pixel or rem amount as part of the property, and I'm kind of moving away from that to have it as small, medium, and large. The main reason for this is because it might be 20 pixel wide on desktop, but it might be 10 pixel wide on mobile. So it's kind of misleading. Well, if you have a small, medium, large naming convention, it's true for all. So that's the only thing that I need to update in this guide. I also talked about combo classes with the layouts. So how to deal with flex alignments and combo classes.
This is great documentation, by the way. It's a great file, and again, documentation is such a crucial thing to do. And all these frameworks that you might find around, they all come with a really great documentation. So don't feel scared of trying them out because just because you don't know how to use them, because chances are you're going to have a great file like this one here with great documentation.
Yeah. And I've learned so much from looking at other people's documentation as well. So even if you're creating or want to create your own, I highly recommend having a look at all the ones out there because they really, really teach a lot. So yes. So the reason why I got onto this is because I wanted to show you the different variation and combo classes. So in here, I also explain what we just said, the primary class and the combo class, and the primary combo class kind of thing. So all of those are covered. And here are the variations. So what did I do? I had, instead of this is an example of a variation of a card. So instead of having it just card, I have it as card padding because it has a padding inside of it. And then inside of these, you might have certain elements which are specific to just the card padding. In this example, actually, none of them. So it would be like called card padding _ event. But in this case, they all kind of have the same because they can be inside of both cards, all these elements inside. Here an example, like I've got this card fill because it has no padding around it and the content fills the entire space. And this image here is specific to be used with the card fill component. So it has like the card fill _ image name. So hopefully, Claudia, that kind of answers your variation question.
Yeah. And actually on that note, if anyone here has got any questions at any point in time, please drop them in the chat. We're assuming everything is clear, but if you would like to kind of revisit some of the things that we are discussing, just let us know.
Yeah, because I find class naming, it's such a like fiddly subject to teach because it's like, oh, you can do this, but then you have so many edge case scenarios where it wouldn't work. So it's like, yeah, this is the rule, but take it with a pinch of salt because every site is different. And I always prefer having less classes, keeping it consistent with a naming convention that makes sense, rather than having to stick exactly to the framework and adding additional divs just because the framework says so, but it adds lots of bloat. So it's always that like balance between the two.
And again, as a concept, this could be, extracted from Webflow and web design, and even for our designers and Figma designers to learn and know about naming conventions. Could be a great aid when it comes to your kind of developer communication. And so when you're designing in Figma, if you know what a good or what the best practice is in terms of naming convention and classes and all that, you can design with that thought in mind, so that it's going to be a lot easier for your developer to then look at your design and understand what everything is meant to be.
That's a great tip. Yeah, I love designs that use the auto layout because I'm like, this is great. I'm just going to use Flexbox for everything. Yeah. Another thing to maybe touch on is spacing. So there's, I think, maybe two different school of thoughts. One that use, always adding spacing to, or like padding or margin to the elements. I actually prefer for layouts to use the gap. So both for the grid and flex, using the gap to space out all the different elements. Again, I think that is personal preference. So whether you use one or the other, it's up to you. I find using the gap, it adds less classes and therefore keeps the bloat down, which I prefer. But it might also become more complicated if you have a complex design. So again, it's down to the design and your site that you're building. But just maybe a bit of a CSS, just in case people get confused why padding and why margin. Padding is inside of the div. So imagine this white line is your div. This inside is your padding. Well, margin is outside of the div. And a few things to note, which is not necessarily obvious. When you stack thing, if you have the padding, it's gonna basically dabble your padding here. So you have these two divs that touch and the spacing is inside. Well, if you have margin, they kind of overlap. So they don't double. They keep it a maximum amount of margin, depending which of the two is bigger, without stacking, let's say. And it could be, I personally use margin way more sparingly than padding, exactly because of these reasons. So I always prefer to use padding unless pad and margin makes sense because of stacking here. And yeah, you can, in your own time, have a look at all the different sections of this documentation. I mean, it's maybe a little bit different than the usual documentations because I tried to list different scenarios and kind of also how Webflow works in different ways and how CSS works in different ways. So it's a bit less of a, this is the framework, this is how you should name things, but more of a theoretical document of, this is how it works and this is how you could name things.
Yeah, more educational. Penny says this is one of the clearest explanations of the box model I've seen. Brava.
Thank you. Yeah, I always feel like I stumble on my words, so thank you for that. So yeah, have a browse. Clamp. We covered this in the last episode, so that's also included in here. So have a browse. Give me feedback. Anything I missed in this document, I'm always happy to revise it and improve it. So if you have any feedback on this, please let me know. This is for you, Claudia. I also have a section on units and where to use them. So
Dun, dun,
yeah, I've
dun.
covered.
I can't escape now. No excuses.
I've covered some of most of them. So with pixels, rems, and EMs, kind of what each one of them means, and possibly what should what should they be used for, with a few examples. This is less visual, I'll say, but hopefully,
Of
yeah. Let me
course.
know what you
It's
think.
units.
Let me know what you think, and hopefully that makes sense as well, because like we mentioned last time, some frameworks encourage you to use specific types of units, while I like to think that each one of them have their own use, and understanding what they do exactly and how they work, and then you can use them in the most appropriate way so that it benefits you more than anything.
You know what? I'm going to turn this into a carousel because that's my way of learning things. So I'll design a carousel for you or for everyone, just based on this page of units.
Perfect. Yes. Yes,
Penny
it's not
says-
very digestible at the moment.
No, it's fine. It's my mental block with this. But yeah. Penny says, is it okay for us to share this document with others?
Yeah, sure. Like I said, if you look at the URL, is just classes-4.webflow.io. Because it doesn't have a name. As we looked at all the different frameworks and they all have names. So if you also want to come up with a name for me, that would be great.
Here's a community challenge, everyone. Let's come up with a framework name for Alessia. You've got about 10 minutes, but also no, I'm joking. If you want to think about it, yeah, we'd love to send her some recommendations or suggestions. Why not?
Right. So yeah, we only have 10 minutes left, and I'm kind of towards the end. I think the last thing that I wanted to maybe cover is custom CSS, just very quickly, just because you don't have class naming without talking about CSS as well. So if I jump into here, and we can go back to the previous page with all the text in it. There's obviously the naming of the class, but it's also how do you structure your CSS in a way. So I don't know if you remember last time that we looked at this, I mentioned, for all your HTML tags and heading class names, to put the spacing to 0 and 0 margin, because we're going to look at it in this lesson. So one thing that I like to do is setting all of your headings and paragraphs with 0 margin on both of them. So reverting the default margin that Webflow sets to them. And I add a little bit of logic in CSS to calculate what the margin should be for each one of these, depending on what element comes after. So let me, just go to normal zoom so I can actually navigate this. And I actually have a component here that I already did with global styles. So I actually usually put these global styles in the navigation, so it automatically adds it to every single page. But you might have noticed that these have changed as soon as I put it in. So if I show you, I'll remove it.
I'm
Look at
loving
all of these
your.
art.
My mind is gone. Another sorry, I'm just reading the chat and some great suggestions already. Less less parentheses yeah, so Lessia is more. That could be a name.
Great.
Or
Nice. Write them all down because then I'll review them all.
Alessia classes. Oh, love it.
Great. Anyway, custom CSS. So as you can see here, it's all tied together, and then as soon as I add the global styles, it kind of spaces it all out. And that is because in my global styles, I've added a little bit of CSS, which actually calculates the spacing after, well, it could be after, it could be before, depending on what you choose, depending on what the elements are. So let me try and zoom in so you can see it better. But what this basically says is for all H1s that are followed by a paragraph, and also all H2 followed by a paragraph and H3 followed by a paragraph, add a margin at the bottom of, this is my variable of the spacing of like spacing small. So if the heading is on its own, it will have no margin. And as soon as you add a paragraph underneath it, it will add margin to it. So that makes make sure that when you're aligning thing, you know, I don't know if you ever come across, you have a card and you have a rich text, which has like, I don't know, a paragraph that has margin at the bottom. And then, you know, the padding isn't consistent all the way around because you have the additional margin of the paragraph. This eliminates all of that because by default, nothing has any margin unless you have specified an element that comes afterwards. So that was my tease from last week answered in this one. So yeah, and for anything like this one is still in here from my template, but now that we have your custom CSS, this, for example, text balance, so the text wrap balance, you can now directly add it in, if I select one of these, or actually a class, at the very bottom, you can add your custom properties. So you can add your custom CSS properties in here as well.
Nice.
So I think this is, where am I going? This is it for today. So we had a very brief overview of frameworks that you should all check out in your spare time. We touched upon the page structure, so the HTML structure of how I structure all of my pages. A little bit about class naming and, you know, how I use underscore to kind of separate the component to the rest of the class name, and some custom CSS in there. So,
Brilliant. Well, it has definitely been a lesson, you know, I feel like back at school. I love it so much. Thank you. And again, super helpful and useful, most importantly as well. We've got about 5 minutes. Should we open up to Q&A?
Yeah, sure. I
Let's
managed
do
to
that.
time my lesson better this time.
Awesome. All right. So as per usual, we would love to open the floor to our Floxies members here first. You people get priority. So if anyone here in the room has got a question they would like to ask or write it in the chat, you can either just jump on your mics, raise your hand, write the question, whatever you like. And I think I did see one already. Oh, Maria, did you want to ask something, or you just showed on camera your pretty face? Awesome. Let me see. We did have a question up here. Yes, from Ashley. If designing wireframes in Figma and marking them up for devs, would you prefer to do that or to send over the wireframes and provide the documentation as a separate doc?
I mean, marking for devs is great because a lot of the time you might have, it happens quite often where you have, I don't know, a 5-page website and the client has signed off the homepage, but not the rest of the pages, for example. So if you mark specific pages which have been signed off for dev, I think that's a great indication because then developers can just focus on those pages. I mean, Figma recently changed, like it was open for everyone before, where anyone could toggle the dev and have a look at the code in Figma. Now it's only for paid accounts, so they restricted it a little, which is a bit frustrating. So I guess it depends who you're sharing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Let me see. We have a question by Abjit. After learning basic CSS, how do you move to advanced properties?
Interesting. Well, I've actually learned a lot of properties just by going to the Webflow add property and have a look at all of what's in here. And then sometimes I would find something that it's intriguing or I want to learn more about it. So I go to the what's it called? The Mozilla. What's this one? CSS. They have.
I was gonna say like Mozilla's in the browser.
Oops. It is, yeah. They have a documentation themselves of all the CSS properties and all the explanations.
I think I might have found it. Yeah.
No, sorry. The MDN docs. Here we go.
Oh, okay. Maria says Kevin Powell. Is that him?
No, Kevin is a god. He's like our CSS god.
Oh, okay. All
So
hail the Kevin.
if you go to this one, the MDN web docs, you can find explanation of like basically all the different CSS properties. I mean, in here you have lots of different examples that you can toggle between. You have your different like syntax. I mean, font size is one of the most obvious ones. But if you can find all of them basically in here. And usually at the end, it also tells you whether they're supported or not by the browsers here. So it's useful for the more experimental ones, especially these ones with the little experiment bottle. This one isn't supported at all. It's useful to have a look in here. So that's where I kind of expand my CSS knowledge from what I already know. I just go and have a browse around. That's one tip.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. So I guess we're at time. Obviously, people, if you do come up with more questions, feel free to connect with Alessia. I've shared her links, but also you'll find her on Discord. If she doesn't get back to you, send them to me because then I can chase her up.
I'm terrible on Discord. So if I don't reply to you straight away, it's not you, it's me.
Like the worst breakup stories. But also, Alessia, I know that you're taking a few days off, a well-deserved break. So I know that we won't be seeing you next week. We're taking a break from this series.
I think we still need to discuss when the next one will be, just because I will be away for the next 2 Wednesdays. I'm on a plane on like the Wednesday after that, so that's going to be a little bit harder to connect. But yes, we'll let you know when the next one is. But I feel like you now have a little bit of knowledge, that you get a little bit of time to explore all of the different frameworks and all of the different options out there, so that you can, try them and see which one fits your style. And we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't you worry, we obviously have, more events coming up. One of them, next week is got to do with sustainable and ethical design. So how to grow your company in a sustainable and ethical way using design. And the next one, the one after that, we will see Diletta, who's a community member, who's, one of our Floxies, and she's gone off to start her own startup, her own company in game development. And so she would like to present all the great work that she's been working on. She's been developing this no-code platform for gaming. And obviously, she's a UX designer. So we're also here to highlight and empower the women of our community, of course. And so I would love to show you all the great work that she's been doing. And then, yes, just like Alessia was saying, we need to kind of gather together and see when the next episode of this series will be, also because Flow Fest in Manchester is coming up in July, so we'll all be traveling and whatnot, and lots of events. So but rest assured, all this whole series, I'm collecting all the episodes into a nice little playlist on YouTube, and so you will see them all concatenated, even though it might take a few weeks to get them to the end. All right.
Yes.
And then with that being said, Alessia, have a great time on your travels. Well deserved. Try to switch
Thank
off.
you so much.
And
I'll
everybody
try.
else,
Not sure.
well, do try. If I see you too much on Twitter, I'll be like, okay, now time for a coffee and a break. And everyone else, I will see you in our Discord as per usual. And I will see you. When are we seeing each other next? On Friday. So we started hosting sort of study sessions together. So if you signed up to a course and you haven't had the time to complete your course, we have some allocated time here at Floxies to to get together and complete those courses together. Some sort of accountability buddy time. Penny, over to you.
I just want to let everybody know No Code North this week is starting our panel discussions. So this week we are going to have a discussion on product building. That'll be with Raimar Tirado building Atmos, Mason Poe, and all the various things that they've been building lately, and Nelson Abalos, who's currently in the midst of building Hyophilia. So we're excited about that new initiative.
Absolutely. I saw that on X and I just didn't clock that it was from No Code North, but I just shared the link in the chat. So yeah, I'll see you on Friday at No Code North, our neighbors. You just have to come out of the gather from Floxies, take a right, and you'll find them.
Just look for the ice hanging off the roof. That's us all the time. Always ice hanging off the roof.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Take care, y'all. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye.